I opened a new credit card the week my mother was scheduled for heart surgery. The hospital quoted $48,000, and insurance would only cover 80%, so I decided to handle the rest myself. It felt like the responsible thing to do, the kind of quiet duty that comes with being the reliable one in the family. I told myself it was temporary, just until Medicare processed, just a bridge over rough water. A week later, I checked my online statement and froze. The balance showed $92,840 in pending charges. I scrolled through the list: Four Seasons Resort in Maui, Tesla Rentals, Louis Vuitton in Honolulu. Each charge had a date, a time, a location that mocked me. It wasn't fraud from a stranger. It was too familiar. At first, I thought the bank had confused my account with someone else's, but every number matched. Every transaction traced back to the same card I had used for groceries and prescriptions. My hands didn't shake. My thoughts did. I tried to reason it away, to believe it was some accounting glitch, because the alternative was unbearable. I kept thinking of the way my mother smiled when I showed her the hospital payment receipt, how proud she looked, how safe I felt knowing she was cared for. Family was supposed to mean trust, and trust, I learned that morning, had a credit limit too. When I called the card company, the agent confirmed the charges were authorized with my name. Not stolen, not cloned, authorized. That word kept ringing in my head like a small, cruel bell. I sat back and stared at the wall, realizing the truth wasn't in the numbers. The truth was sitting somewhere in my mother's house, wrapped in silence and good intentions. What broke me wasn't the missing money. It was what she chose to protect once I found out. The gold card had been missing for weeks before I even noticed. It was the backup card tied to my business account, the one I used for client expenses and tax filings, not groceries or bills. I remembered setting it aside months earlier after renewing the insurance premium, telling myself to keep it safe. That afternoon, as I reviewed the statements again, I saw it. The last 4 digits on the Maui transactions matched the company card, not the one I opened for my mother's surgery. My chest went still. It wasn't a random thief or a cyber scam. It was someone who knew exactly which account held the higher limit and the cleaner record. I drove to my mother's house, the kind of drive where every red light feels like a countdown. She sat at the kitchen table, folding bills into neat piles, as if debt could be made smaller by precision. I asked if she had seen a gold card with my name on it. She hesitated, then reached into her purse and pulled it out like it was nothing. She said she thought it was one of hers. Her tone was flat, practiced, too calm for what it was. I waited for an apology, a flicker of shame, but she only looked past me, toward the window, as if daylight could answer for her. When I checked the balance that night, the total was $92,840.63. Every charge matched my sister's travel posts: Hawaii beaches, infinity pools, cocktails lined up like trophies. I stared at the receipts, realizing my company's tax ID had been used. This wasn't family borrowing money. It was identity theft wrapped in sentiment. The betrayal wasn't in the spending, but in the confidence it took to do it under my name. I sat in the dark for a long time, hearing the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the faint echo of her voice in my head. She said she thought it was hers. Maybe that was true in her mind. Maybe she believed everything I owned belonged to us. But I finally understood what she never would. Loyalty without truth isn't love. It's manipulation dressed as family. Maya Hensley met me at a small coffee shop on the east side of town, the kind where everything smelled like roasted beans and restraint. She arrived in a gray suit, hair pinned back, a calm presence that made the air around her feel steadier. I handed her a folder thick with printouts, each page showing the charges, dates, and account numbers tied to my company. She skimmed through them without changing expression. When she finally looked up, she asked what outcome I wanted. I told her I wanted accountability. She nodded once, almost like I had ordered a drink instead of justice. Maya explained that corporate fraud cases involving more than $50,000 automatically trigger a federal review. Because the gold card was tied to my LLC, not to me personally, the transactions qualified as business identity theft. That meant I was covered by liability insurance, and the bank would issue a full refund once the fraud was verified. She began mapping out steps on a legal pad: file a fraud report with the issuing bank, submit documentation to the insurer, notify the IRS Business Division, and prepare for a potential federal inquiry. Her tone never changed, smooth and methodical, the kind of logic that made chaos shrink into paperwork. I watched her draw arrows between words like restitution, recovery, and investigation, and realized how small my anger looked compared to her precision. The law didn't care about family drama, it cared about documentation. Every sentence she spoke replaced my confusion with structure. By the time she closed the folder, I wasn't trembling anymore. I understood that revenge wasn't the point. Clarity was. The truth didn't need fire to burn, it just needed light. That night, I opened every old folder I had ever tried to forget. Bank transfers, wire receipts, screenshots of messages where I had covered rent, tuition, and bail, line after line of transactions, some for $200, some for $10,000. Over 7 years, the total reached $174,600, all given under the promise of payback that never came. I read through each note of gratitude, each excuse for delay, and realized how carefully manipulation had been disguised as love. My phone screen glowed in the dark as I renamed the folder Evidence, then uploaded every file to a shared drive labeled for Maya. It should have felt cold, reducing years of sacrifice to numbers and attachments. Instead, it felt like the first honest record of what really happened. I sat back and watched the upload bar move, slow and deliberate, a quiet act of reclaiming control. Every receipt told the story. My memory had softened. I wasn't sending revenge, I was sending proof. When the final file was confirmed sent, I closed the laptop and let the silence settle. For the first time in years, I wasn't the caretaker or the dependable one. I was the witness, and that was enough. My mother called late on a Sunday evening, her voice sharp from the start. She said I needed to stop the case before it destroyed the family. She reminded me that family forgives, that no matter what happens, blood should protect blood. I listened, staring at the faint reflection of my face in the kitchen window, wondering when forgiveness had become her favorite form of control. Every time someone in our family made a mistake, that phrase appeared like a command. When my brother wrecked my car, she said family forgives. When my sister borrowed money and never returned it, she said the family forgives. What she really meant was that I should pay the price to keep the peace. Her words carried the same tired rhythm as always. She talked about loyalty, about love, about how disappointed my father would be if he were still alive. I said nothing. The glass in my hand trembled and cracked under my grip, a small spider web forming across its surface. The sound broke the silence like truth breaking through a lie. I set it down carefully and stared at it, thinking how much our family had looked like that glass. Clear from a distance, fractured up close. Over the next few days, the phone calls came from different numbers, all with the same message. Let it go. She made a mistake. Be the bigger person. I stopped answering. Instead, I installed new security cameras outside my house and changed the locks. Control wasn't cruelty anymore. It was clarity. For the first time, I wasn't trying to fix the damage. I was learning how not to invite it back in. I understood then that guilt had been their currency, and I had been the one funding it. They used love like leverage, turning compassion into debt. Standing by them had always meant standing against myself. I finally decided to stop. Loyalty, I realized, isn't about staying when others betray you. It's about staying true to what you know is right, even if it means standing alone. The courtroom felt colder than I expected. The walls were pale gray, the kind of color that made everything inside look smaller. My sister sat at the defense table, hands folded neatly on top, eyes lowered just enough to look remorseful. She wore a beige sweater and no makeup, a deliberate choice to look harmless. I could feel the quiet hum of the fluorescent lights above us, the kind of sound that fills every pause when people are too polite to speak. The judge asked questions in a steady rhythm, his voice flat but heavy with authority. When it was my turn, I stood and took a slow breath before walking to the stand. I explained how the card was registered to my company, not to me personally, and how every purchase had come through my business account. I described the hotel charges, the flights, the designer receipts, and the proof linking her to each transaction. My words came out calm, measured, the kind of calm that comes only after anger has burned itself out. I said this was not about revenge. It was about my name, my credit, my reputation, and the work I had spent years building. She hadn't just taken my money. She had taken my face and worn it for a week of luxury. The room went quiet for a moment. I felt the stillness settle like dust. My attorney closed the folder, the judge nodded, and I sat back down. I wasn't trembling anymore. I wasn't waiting for remorse. The truth had been spoken, and that was enough. The verdict came quickly. The judge ruled that my sister would pay full restitution to the insurance company and lose all credit privileges for 5 years. Her assets would be monitored, her record marked, her freedom narrowed to the consequences she created. I listened without satisfaction, only a quiet sense of balance settling into place. When the gavel struck, it didn't sound like victory. It sounded like closure. I stood and gathered my papers while my mother stared at the floor, refusing to meet my eyes. My sister waited near the aisle, arms crossed, her voice low as I passed. She asked if I was happy now. I stopped just long enough to look at her. I told her I wasn't happy. I was free. The words didn't need weight. They were light enough to lift the moment. Outside, the sunlight was sharp and clean after the cold air of the courthouse. I reached into my pocket and touched the gold bracelet I had bought weeks earlier, the one with my initials engraved on the inside. It caught the light as I slipped it on, a quiet symbol of something I had finally reclaimed. Not revenge, not pride, just dignity. And that was enough. After the trial, I went home and started deleting names from my phone. First my sister, then my mother. The silence that followed didn't feel empty, it felt organized. I changed my passwords, closed the old accounts, and met with a financial advisor who helped me rebuild what had been scattered. The more I secured, the lighter I felt. Peace was not hiding from the past. It was keeping the door locked when chaos came knocking again. The house looked different without the clutter. I cleared the shelves, threw away the cracked glass from that night, and opened the windows to let fresh air in. My phone stayed still for days, no missed calls, no late-night guilt disguised as concern. I realized that quiet wasn't loneliness. It was space, the kind I had never allowed myself to keep. Forgiveness came in small moments, not through reunion, but through release. I didn't need anyone to see me as right or wrong. I just needed to live without explaining my worth. Some debts are emotional and they cannot be repaid. I learned to stop collecting them. Forgiveness, I discovered, isn't reopening the wound. It's closing the ledger and deciding the balance no longer belongs to you. People like to say that integrity comes easily to good people, but that isn't true. Integrity costs more than comfort. It asks you to stand still when silence would protect you and to speak when no one wants to hear it. I learned that truth rarely wins applause. It wins peace, and peace is harder earned. Sometimes I look at the gold bracelet on my wrist and remember how it felt to buy something that finally belonged only to me, not borrowed, not shared, not taken. It reminds me that dignity isn't inherited. It is built in moments when you refuse to trade honesty for approval. The world often rewards silence, but silence is just a debt waiting to collect interest. I've learned to settle mine differently. Some debts are paid in money, some in silence, but the rarest ones are paid in freedom, and that is what I chose.